You want it back? Then you should have never left it in the first place. Veylen Drask tightened his grip on the control sticks, maneuvering the ardent fang through the skeletal wreckage of a derelict docking bay. His ship rattled as it slipped through the shattered hull of Vorrak Prime, an alien station long thought to be just another floating graveyard. The place smelled like death, stale air, metal decay, and something sharp that clung to the back of his throat like a warning. The kind of place where things had gone horribly wrong, and whatever had happened still lingered in the bones of the station. His AI, Kylus, flickered onto the heads-up display in his helmet, its humanoid form formed from shifting strands of blue light. Readings are unstable. Power levels keep spiking, then dropping like something's draining them. This station should be dead, but I'm detecting movement. No shit, Veylen muttered, guiding the fang through a half-collapsed docking tunnel. Outside, the rogue planet Vorac drifted in the abyss, its cracked surface catching distant starlight in a way that made it look like it was watching. He hated it. Something about this station, this planet, felt wrong. The fang's landing struts clamped onto the fractured deck, metal groaning under its weight. Environmental scan? Oxygen levels are borderline toxic but survivable with filtration. Temperatures holding at -40. Gravity, intermittent. You might feel weightless one second and like you weigh a ton the next. Tread carefully. Veylen exhaled through his teeth. That meant whatever powered this place wasn't fully dead, just waiting. He unlatched the cockpit, a hiss of pressurized air spilling into the chamber. As the doors yawned open, a heavy silence bled into the cabin, a silence so thick it felt deliberate. Stepping onto the deck, his boots crunched against a thin sheet of brittle frost. His helmet's laser plasma display mapped out the corridor ahead. Frozen panels, blackened walls, clawed by something that had left gashes deeper than plasma burns. A single light flickered in the distance. "You see that?" he asked Kylus. "Yes, but I do not think it sees you yet." That wasn't reassuring. He moved forward, careful not to jolt the unstable deck beneath him. The walls were covered in Xelari script, their curling, elegant characters fractured with time. Some of the words looked scorched, as if someone had tried to burn them away. A deep clank echoed through the station, distant but deliberate, not the sound of decay, the sound of something shifting. Veylen's fingers tightened around his rifle. He was not alone. He reached the central operations chamber, a vast circular room lined with dead command interfaces. At its center, a massive laser plasma display flickered with a single Xelari sigil, blinking erratically. "You are not authorized to be here." The voice didn't come from his helmet. It came from everywhere. Veylen's breath stilled. "Identify yourself," he said, his voice calm but coiled tight. Static crackled through the room. Then, "You should not be here." Kylus's form glowed brighter in his heads-up display, its fragmented face twisting in what almost looked like unease. "That's not a standard AI response, Veylen. That's an echo. A recorded loop. Then something must have triggered it." Veylen took a slow step forward. The ice beneath his boots splintered like bone. The display jerked, flickering wildly as if something were waking up. Then, with an unnatural fluidity, a figure emerged from the darkness. Xelari. Or at least, what had once been one. Its armor was warped, its organic plating fused with mechanical implants, tendrils of blackened circuitry threading into its flesh like parasitic roots. Its luminous eyes, once the color of burning stars, had dulled into something empty, and it was still moving. "Kylus, I know." The thing lifted its twisted right arm, cables pulsing along its forearm like veins, the fingers unfolding into something that looked like a weapon and a limb at the same time. Then it lunged. Veylen fired, 3 rounds to center mass. The shot struck, sending it staggering back, but it didn't drop. The body jerked, convulsing, then straightened like a puppet, finding its strings again. "Yeah, that's not normal." It charged again. Through metal like it was wet paper. Sparks burst from ruptured panels. He pivoted, slamming the butt of his rifle into the creature's jaw. The impact cracked through the room, snapping its head to the side, but it twisted back unnaturally, resetting itself like a machine. It wasn't just Xelari. It was something else now. Veylen dropped low, unsheathing the plasma-edged knife at his hip. The next time it swung, he sidestepped and plunged the blade into its throat. A hiss of energy met the wet crack of ruptured flesh. The creature spasmed, then fell still. The room sank into silence. "I'd like to say that's the end of it," Kylus said, "but I think we both know better." Veylen exhaled. Whatever the Xelari had left behind, it wasn't just abandoned. It was locked away. He wiped his blade against his sleeve, stepping back as the corpse twitched once, then finally lay still. Then, a distant metallic wail echoed through the station. Not one, dozens. Veylen clenched his jaw. Something had woken up. And now, they were listening. "Kylus, patch into the station's archives. I need to know exactly what the Xelari were hiding here. You might not like the answer." "I already don't." The display flickered again, glitching between static and symbols. Then, in sharp, jagged Terran script, the words appeared. "Evacuation failure, quarantine breach, contact lost." The station hadn't been abandoned. It had been quarantined. And he had just let it out. The station breathed, not in the way a living thing does, but in a way that made Veylen's skin prickle beneath his suit. The corridors exhaled cold, sterile air, like a slumbering giant stirring from its forced dormancy. Metal groaned as if stretching, recalibrating itself to the presence of something it hadn't accounted for. Him. The dead creature at his feet twitched. Its broken limbs, twisted and inert, remained where they were, yet something in the air whispered of unfinished business. The corpse was just a symptom. The disease was still alive. "Kylus," he said, voice low but clipped. "What am I standing in the middle of?" The AI flickered on his heads-up display, its usually smooth humanoid form disrupted by erratic flickers of static. That wasn't normal. "I'm sorting through fragmented logs," Kylus replied, its tone sharper than before, as if forced to override something unseen. Whatever happened here wasn't a simple evacuation. The Xelari weren't just running from something, they were losing. Veylen's fingers tightened around his rifle. The words felt heavy. Losing meant something was fighting back. Losing meant something had won. A distant clang shuddered through the station, metal shifting against metal, distant but coming closer. Not footsteps, not movement in any natural sense. It was like the station itself was recalibrating. He turned to the laser plasma display, still flickering in the center of the chamber. It cycled through unreadable alien script before shifting to something almost familiar: schematics. A three-dimensional construct of a machine he'd never seen before, yet something about it screamed war. "That's not a reactor," Kylus murmured. Veylen studied the display. The design was too intricate for a power source, too compact for a ship, but its core held a depth of energy that felt like it was breathing. It wasn't a machine. It was a weapon. "Kylus, extract that data, now." "You might not like what you find." "That hasn't stopped me yet." The AI went silent for a moment, processing, while Veylen kept his rifle angled toward the corridor. A pressure in the air shifted, a presence he couldn't see but could feel. Then, from the corner of his vision, a glow. The laser plasma display stuttered, and something new appeared, a recorded transmission. The image was broken, flickering in and out of form, but the voice remained. "Xelari. They won't let us leave. The station is adapting to us. I think—" Static swallowed the next words before the voice returned, ragged, desperate. "It's not a failure. It's working too well. The recording cut out. Veylen stared at the frozen frame of the last image, a figure, barely visible, standing at the end of a corridor, its eyes burning through the screen. Then, the station answered. A sharp metallic shriek carved through the halls, and this time it wasn't distant. It was close. Something was coming. He pivoted, rifle raised, backing toward the nearest exit as the air grew charged, the walls themselves seeming to close in. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching toward him like reaching fingers. "Kylus!" he barked. We're leaving. I would agree. Veylen turned just as the corridor burst alive with movement. The first figures emerged, crawling from the darkness, not bodies, but fragments of them. Twisted Xelari remnants, their once proud armor fused into the station's very structure, dragging themselves forward with the efficiency of something that no longer needed flesh to move. They weren't corpses. They were part of the station now. He fired. Energy rounds tore through the first one, ripping through layers of fused plating. But it didn't fall. It just restructured. The station was adapting. His boots slammed against the deck as he sprinted, ducking into the next passageway. The walls pulsed faintly, shifting. This station was supposed to be abandoned, but it wasn't. It was awake. Veylen reached the docking bay just as the ardent Fang's engines flared to life. He launched himself into the open hatch, sealing the entry behind him. "Kylus, detach now!" The clamps released, and the Fang lurched backward, the station shrinking in his viewport. His breath was ragged, muscles coiled tight as he watched the vast structure drift into the black, its silhouette looking less like a station and more like something waiting. Then his radar pinged. Not from the station, from above. Multiple signals, large, moving fast. He didn't have to guess. Someone else had been listening. The Fang's comm crackled. Then a voice. Veylen Drask. He recognized that voice, and he hated it. "Been a long time." Admiral Callus Wren's voice slithered through the channel, smooth as a blade against steel. Veylen's fingers curled into fists. "Not long enough." "You found something, didn't you?" Veylen stayed silent. "You always did have a talent for sticking your hands where they don't belong. Fortunately, you saved me the trouble of digging it up myself." A distant shift in the radar. Veylen's jaw clenched. Wren wasn't here alone. "Get to the point," he said, voice flat. "You already know it. Whatever's on that station, it's valuable enough that you risked waking it up. That means it's valuable enough for me to take." A heavy silence. Then, "Stand down, Veylen. Give me what you found, and I might let you live." Veylen leaned back in his seat, exhaling slow. The last time he'd seen Callus Wren, the bastard had left him to die in the wreckage of a battle that wasn't his to lose. The difference between then and now, Veylen wasn't planning on dying. He switched off the comm, locked onto the nearest jump trajectory, and smiled, cold, sharp. If Wren wanted what was in that station, he'd have to bleed for it. Veylen Drask had fought in wars, crawled through wreckage where oxygen was a luxury, and stared death in the face more times than he cared to count. But as he sat in the cockpit of the Ardent Fang, watching the station shrink in the viewport, something twisted in his gut. The Vorrak Prime station should not have been breathing, and yet, as he left it behind, the structure seemed to shift, not just from his fleeing trajectory, but as if it were reacting to his absence. "New contacts," Kylus murmured. Veylen's pulse steadied, but his grip on the flight controls tensed. The heads-up display painted a grim picture. Multiple warp signatures, large enough to eclipse stars, bleeding into real space like phantoms stepping through a veil. Then the alert screamed red. "Tell me that's not Wren's fleet." "It's worse." Beyond the debris field, space bent and tore apart at its seams. The ships that emerged carried no insignia, no Terran call signs. Their hulls bore no scars of war, no desperate patchwork repairs like human vessels. They came through the rift with the calculated silence of creatures that did not know defeat. Xelari, dozens of them. Their warships were things of elegance and brutality fused into one, a lattice of reinforced hull plating, woven like living architecture, gleaming with an energy signature that vibrated in the bones. Then the first transmission arrived. "Terran vessel, this is High Strategist Relic of the Xelari Dominion. Vorrak Prime is sovereign Xelari property. You have 60 seconds to power down your engines and submit to Dominion control." Veylen's chest rose and fell in slow deliberation. "Kylus, tell me we got that station data before I ran like hell." "All of it," he exhaled through his teeth. "The Xelari weren't just reclaiming abandoned property. They were here because something inside that station had called them back. And if that was true, if he had triggered it, then Wren's fleet was about to walk into a slaughter." Veylen tapped a control, sending an encrypted pulse through the comms network, piggybacking it off neutral relay satellites. A voice as unwelcome as an open wound crackled through the channel. "Whatever you're about to do, don't." Wren's reply came laced with dry amusement. "You sound nervous, Drask. Afraid your find isn't as exclusive as you thought? Listen to me, you don't want what's inside that station. And yet, I'm willing to kill for it." Veylen felt it before he saw it, the flicker of movement in the viewport. The Xelari ships shifted into attack formation. Their war machines did not advance in haste. They moved with deliberate glacial certainty, like predators in deep waters, circling their prey with the knowledge that the hunt was already over. Veylen clenched his jaw. "Wren, turn back. I don't care what you think you're here for. If you land on that station, you are not leaving alive." "Funny," Wren mused. "I was about to tell you the same thing." The laser plasma display flared, warning signs flashing as the first Xelari cannons locked onto targets. Then, a voice cut through the channel. Not Wren's, not Veylen's. A Xelari transmission, broad spectrum, directed at every human vessel in the sector. "All Terran forces within this system are trespassing on restricted Xelari property. You have one opportunity to comply. If you refuse, your existence will be erased." No emotion, no anger, just the weight of an empire that had never once negotiated with lesser beings. The stars themselves seemed to freeze. Then, the first shot fired. Veylen's ship lurched violently, thrown sideways as energy lanced through the black. His displays screamed warnings, shockwaves rippling through the sector as Xelari weapons cut into Wren's fleet with scalpel-like precision. He'd seen ship battles before. Hell, he'd been in them. This wasn't war. This was execution. Terran destroyers barely had time to adjust formation before they began dying. One by one, human warships ruptured like carcasses beneath the weight of something bigger, faster, older. Xelari artillery didn't bombard in reckless barrages. They picked ships apart. They cut throats instead of throwing fists. A Terran battlecruiser, the Iron Wing, made a desperate break for evasive maneuvering, only for two Xelari warships to appear on either side of it, slicing through its hull like a beast flaying its meal. The explosion bloomed bright, then was gone. Veylen swallowed. He'd warned Wren. This wasn't a salvage mission anymore. It wasn't even a war. It was an extinction event, and Wren had just made humanity the target. "Veylen," Kylus interjected, voice sharp. "That station is still broadcasting something. Its frequency has increased since the Xelari arrived." Veylen's breath stilled. It had called them here, number not just them. Something else was listening. He pulled the Ardent Fang into a sharp roll, dodging the debris of a shattered Terran frigate. The Xelari warships moved through the wreckage unchallenged, gliding over the remnants of human metal, as if they were ghosts treading over forgotten bones. Veylen scanned the carnage, trying to find Wren's flagship. Then he saw it. The Resolute, a Terran battle carrier, trailing smoke and bleeding atmosphere, its once imposing form riddled with punctures where Xelari fire had skinned it open. And yet, it wasn't running. Wren was still fighting. The laser plasma display flickered with a new transmission. "Veylen!" Wren's voice was still there, but something had cracked in it. "Tell me how to kill them." Veylen let out a slow breath, gaze flicking to the Vorrak Prime station. "You can't." There was a silence, a heavy one. Then Wren's voice returned, low. "Then tell me something I can use." Veylen's throat was dry, his mind running through every possible angle, every strategy. The Xelari weren't here for war. They weren't even here for conquest. They were answering a call. And if they were here, then they were afraid of something bigger. Veylen stared at the station one last time, the place where it had all started. The place where the truth, whatever it was, had been locked away. "Kylus," he murmured, "we need to go back." The AI hesitated. "Back to Vorrak Prime? Back to whatever the Xelari are so terrified of?" Kylus said nothing. Outside, the battle raged. Inside, Veylen had already made his decision. "Kylus, Get me a firing solution on that blockade. That would require a miracle, and I am currently fresh out. Veylen Drask gritted his teeth, gripping the Ardent Fang's controls as he forced the ship into a tight barrel roll between spinning debris and dying warships. The Xelari weren't just winning, they were demolishing. The battlefield wasn't even a battlefield anymore. It was a scrapyard in the making. Terran vessels, once formidable in their rugged, brutal efficiency, were nothing but drifting carcasses, their insides spilling into the abyss. Xelari warships cut through the destruction with predatory grace, leaving no room for counterattacks. Yet despite everything, Ren hadn't run. Veylen's display locked onto Resolute, still holding its ground, still trading blows with an enemy that wasn't even breaking a sweat. "Drask!" Ren's voice crackled through the comms. "I don't have time for your dramatics. You said there was something bigger. Tell me where to aim." Veylen's gaze snapped back to Vorrak Prime. The station was wrong. It had once been a relic, cold and abandoned. Now it pulsed. Not with light, not with energy, but with intention. The way a wound festers before it bursts. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a loaded weapon, waiting for someone to pull the trigger. "Kylus, tell me you found something in those archives. Something we can use." The AI's humanoid projection flickered into his heads-up display, its blue energy-threaded form shifting with data that seemed distorted, incomplete. "The station is running on an old Xelari failsafe system. If it recognizes an external threat beyond operational control, it initiates a self-defense mode. Which means Vorrak Prime might be the only thing in this system capable of hurting the Xelari." Veylen's pulse hammered. He toggled the comms. "Ren, listen carefully. I need you to push every surviving Terran ship back toward Vorrak Prime. You want me to herd them into the barrel of a loaded gun? I want you to give the Xelari a reason to shoot at something other than us." There was a pause, not hesitation, calculation. Then, "Understood." Veylen fired his thrusters, cutting hard toward the station. The Fang bucked against the shifting gravity fields, Vorac's artificial atmosphere pressing against the hull as it drew him back into its skeletal embrace. The docking clamps hadn't reset. No security lockdown, no resistance. It wanted him back. That was the problem. The station was expecting him. The moment he breached the decompression corridor, the lights flickered to life. No, not lights. Warnings. A cascade of Xelari symbols flooded the laser plasma displays, shifting too fast to read. Then abruptly they stopped. One sentence remained. Self-diagnostic incomplete. Hostile presence identified. Veylen exhaled. He wasn't the hostile presence. The Xelari were. "Kylus, how much control do you have?" "Minimal. The station is running on an adaptive encryption system. It's rewriting itself faster than I can decode. Then I'll find the manual override." He moved quickly, boots grinding against the slick metallic flooring as he made his way to the station's command sector. The corridors felt different this time. Before they had been a tomb, cold, lifeless. Now they breathed, like something was waiting for him to see it. The main chamber doors hissed open, revealing a central control column wrapped in layers of intricate alien conduits. Embedded within it, pulsing like a mechanical heart, was the failsafe core. He stepped closer. The air hummed, static clinging to his skin like a living thing. Then the station spoke. "Access denied." A rush of energy crackled through the room, a shockwave rippling outward. Veylen braced himself against the console. "That wasn't me," Kylus murmured. "I know." Something was reacting to him, or to something else. Outside the viewport, Xelari warships descended on Vorrak Prime. "Ren, you better be ready." "I was born ready." The Terran fleet broke formation, pulling back toward the station just as the Xelari pushed forward. The movement was deliberate, a feint. The Dominion forces saw an easy kill, an already broken fleet limping back to its grave. They pursued, and that was their first mistake. "Kylus, override anything that looks like a targeting system and make it angry. That is an extremely broad request. Figure it out." Veylen slammed his palm onto the console, triggering a manual override sequence. The failsafe core flickered, system snarling against his intrusion. A moment of hesitation. Then, Vorrak Prime roared awake. Anti-fleet turrets unfolded from the station's exterior, ancient Xelari cannons that had remained dormant for decades. The ground itself shifted, entire platforms locking into new configurations as targeting arrays came online. The station wasn't a battleground, it was a weaponized stronghold. And now, it was pissed. "Systems online," Kylus announced. "I may have accidentally activated everything." "Good. Let's make them regret it." The first volley of station artillery tore through the Xelari warships. Not scattered, reckless fire, but coordinated surgical destruction. The kind of precision that only an automated defense grid could execute with merciless efficiency. A Xelari battlecruiser veered hard to the left, its shields shuddering under concentrated blasts. Another warship attempted an evasive dive. Too late. The station's firepower ripped through its underbelly, gutting it from the inside out. The tide shifted. Veylen didn't celebrate. He had done exactly what he needed to, baited the Xelari into fighting their own ghosts. But this wasn't over. The station had responded. Now, it would finish what it had started. Kylus's voice came through, tinged with something uncharacteristically uneasy. "Veylen, the failsafe protocol isn't stopping." His fingers curled against the console. "Meaning?" "Meaning the station isn't just targeting the Xelari." The words hit like a cold wind to the ribs. Veylen turned back to the viewport. The Xelari weren't the only ones caught in the crossfire. Terran ships, Wren's fleet. Vorrak Prime wasn't a weapon of war. It was a weapon of eradication. "Kylus, shut it down." "I don't think I can." Outside, the station's artillery rotated, and this time, it was aiming at everyone. Veylen exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Then we just started a war no one's walking away from." "Kylus, get me a way to shut this down." That would require the station to be listening. Right now it's speaking in bullets. Veylen Drask could already see the carnage unfolding outside Vorrak Prime's viewport. The station had awakened, and now it wasn't just retaliating, it was purging. Xelari warships twisted, their sleek, calculated formations fracturing under relentless automated fire. The Dominion fleet had come here expecting to retake their station, but they hadn't prepared for a system that didn't recognize them anymore. And the Terran fleet, Wren's fleet, was caught in the maelstrom. The station's defensive artillery shifted, new targeting vectors locking onto both sides as if it had finally come to a single, inevitable conclusion. Everyone was an intruder. Veylen moved fast, boots hitting the command floor as he sprinted for the station's failsafe control relay. His heads-up display flickered with Kylus's fractured interface, the AI struggling to keep up with the station's erratic rewriting. "Failsafe override is cycling through encrypted redundancies," Kylus said. "Every time I crack one, it spawns 3 more. Then we stop playing defense." Veylen reached the manual override panel, forcing it open with the butt of his rifle. The station's inner circuitry pulsed, alive and rejecting his presence, but he didn't have time for caution. He bypassed the main processing node, rerouting control pathways toward a dead loop, anything to stall its firing sequences. The problem was, this wasn't just programming anymore. The station wasn't following old orders. It was learning. "Drask," Wren's voice cut through the comms. "I hope you're close to pulling a miracle, because I'm running out of ships." Veylen's jaw tensed. He glanced at the viewport, taking in the wreckage. A Terran warship breaking apart in slow, agonizing fractures, its emergency thrusters flickering against the station's wrath. Another blast lanced through the dark, gutting a Xelari dreadnought in one merciless strike. There was no diplomacy here, no sides, just obliteration. "You wanted to know what they were afraid of?" Veylen muttered. "Take a good look, Wren. They didn't abandon this place. They ran." The station trembled, not from external fire, not from impact. Something inside shifted. A slow, grinding recalibration, a deliberate shift of its core systems. The attack had been the first phase. Now, it was preparing for the next. "Kylus!" Veylen barked, fingers flying across the relay panel. "What's it doing?" The AI hesitated. That was bad. "Veylen, The station isn't just defending itself anymore. The words settled in his chest like iron sinking in water. It's escalating. Veylen looked back at the laser plasma display, watching as the station's weapon systems reconfigured. The defensive grid was shutting down. The power signature was redirecting. No, not redirecting. Charging. Drask, what's happening? Something worse. The failsafe protocol hadn't just activated the defenses. It had accessed the station's original core systems. Vorrak Prime wasn't built as a military outpost. It had never been just a research station. It had been a testing ground, and now the experiment was waking up. Kylus, tell me you've got something. I am running out of ways to tell you that this station does not want to be shut down. Veylen's vision darkened at the edges as he forced his hands through the relay, bypassing the primary encryption layers. There, a buried subroutine hidden beneath layers of Xelari firewalls. Not an override, a log. He accessed it without thinking, and for the first time the station responded. The laser plasma display flickered, and then a Xelari face appeared. Not a recording, a live feed. Their eyes were empty, not lifeless, worse, hollow, like something else was looking through them. The threshold has been breached, the Xelari said. Their voice was off. Not mechanical, not distorted, just wrong, like it wasn't meant for human ears. Containment failure is complete. You should not have come here. Veylen's skin went cold. This wasn't a distress call. It was a warning, and it wasn't meant for him. Kylus, cut the feed. I didn't start it. The Xelari's mouth moved, but their words didn't match the movement. You have unsealed what was buried. Veylen's pulse slowed. The battle outside no longer mattered. The Xelari fleet, the Terran ships, they were footnotes now, because whatever the Xelari had locked away here wasn't a weapon. It was something far worse. The Xelari's head twitched, eyes flickering. There is no victory. There is no escape. And then, it is awake. The station convulsed. The power grid flared to full capacity, systems rebooting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. This wasn't just an old experiment coming back online. This was something intelligent, something ancient, something that had been waiting. Kylus, I know! The failsafe core burned white-hot, data streams flaring in rapid, uncontrolled bursts. The station wasn't a weapon. It was a prison. And now, the doors had been kicked wide open. Veylen grabbed the manual shutdown relay. Kylus, tell me shutting this down will fix it. I could tell you that, but I would be lying. Outside, the Xelari warships broke formation. They had never been here to fight. They had been here to stop this from happening. Veylen's grip tightened. Then tell me what happens if I let this run its course. The AI's voice faltered. Then whatever was inside Vorrak Prime doesn't stay inside anymore. The station shuddered, energy surging through its core, unlocking systems buried for decades. Outside, the Xelari fleet pivoted, not to finish off the Terrans, not to reclaim the station. They were retreating, fleeing, because they knew. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was the beginning of something far worse. And Veylen had just unleashed it. The station shook like a beast pulling against its chains. Veylen's breath was steady, but his grip on the control panel had turned his knuckles bloodless. Vorrak Prime's entire power grid was funneling into something buried beneath its structure, something the Xelari had locked away long before any human had set foot in this sector. And now, the lock was breaking. Outside, the Xelari fleet was fleeing, not regrouping, not holding their ground. They were running. Kylus, tell me you have something. Only an existential crisis and a growing concern for our immediate mortality. The laser plasma display flooded with alien script, text shifting erratically as the station's internal systems overrode Kylus's intrusion. The manual override he had activated minutes ago was now irrelevant. Vorrak Prime wasn't rejecting him anymore. It had stopped seeing him at all. Wren's voice sliced through the comms. Drask, what the hell did you do? It's not what I did, Veylen shot back, watching the Xelari ships vanish into warp space one after another, abandoning the battle. It's what they were trying to stop. We are sitting in the middle of a station that is deciding if we are worth keeping alive, and you're giving me a history lesson? I'm telling you the war you started was never the real threat. Silence. Then a ragged exhale. Then tell me what is. Veylen didn't have an answer. Not yet. The deck groaned beneath his boots, the air itself thick with static, pulsing in waves against his skin. It was different from the Xelari encryption pulses, different from the electromagnetic surges of Terran systems. It felt organic. Veylen, Kylus murmured. Something else is accessing the station. The laser plasma display glitched, the Xelari script dissolving into something older, something not meant to be read. The text crawled across the screen in jagged, writhing symbols. Not alien, not human. It wasn't a language. It was a signal, a voice without sound, a thought that did not belong to him. Then, a single line of translated text flashed into existence. "We are awakened." Veylen's pulse slammed into his ribs. "Kylus, shut it down. Shut everything down." "I can't," the station screamed. Every system flared to life at once. Lights burned with unnatural intensity, displays flickered with a chaotic flood of unreadable data, and a low, rhythmic vibration coursed through the walls. Not machinery. A pulse. A heartbeat. Outside, Terran ships scattered, breaking formation as something shifted beneath Vorrak Prime. The station's lower decks twisted, entire platforms retracted, revealing what had never been meant to be seen. A structure hidden beneath its reinforced exoskeleton. A sphere, miles wide. Not metal, not technology, something else. Something that was waiting. "Drask!" Wren's voice cut through the chaos. "Tell me that thing is still on our side." Veylen didn't answer, because he wasn't sure it ever had been. Kylus's voice was taut. "Veylen, I think I know what the Xelari were afraid of." He didn't move, didn't breathe. "It's not just the station that was quarantined." Veylen looked at the sphere, at the way it seemed to pulse beneath the structure of Vorrak Prime, the way the entire station had been built around it. "The Xelari didn't abandon this place because of a war," Kylus continued. "They left because they realized too late." Veylen's throat tightened. They weren't keeping something out. The station shuddered, and the sphere moved. They were keeping something in. The station's artillery turned, not on the remaining Xelari forces, not on the Terran fleet, on Vorac Prime itself. It was trying to destroy itself. Veylen's mind raced. The station wasn't malfunctioning. It wasn't on a warpath. It was executing a last resort, a failsafe. "Wren, whatever you're doing, stop." "I'm trying to keep my men alive, Drask, which is more than I can say for you." "Then listen to me." Wren didn't respond. Veylen forced the comms to full sector broadcast. "All Terran ships disengage. Fall back to neutral space now. We still have a fighting chance." One of Wren's officers cut in. "You don't understand," Veylen snapped. "This station was never just a weapon. It was a goddamn containment unit. And it just decided it can't contain whatever's inside anymore." The sphere pulsed. The darkness within it rippled, then stretched, then it opened. Not physically, not in any way the human mind was designed to comprehend, but Veylen felt it, like a crack in reality itself. A door that had never been meant to be opened. A presence that had never been meant to wake. And now, it saw them. "Veylen," Kylus's voice was quiet. "What?" "Something is looking back." A wave of raw force erupted from the sphere, an energy blast that didn't register on any scanner, didn't have a known signature. It wasn't technological. It was something else entirely, and it was spreading. The first Terran cruiser caught in the blast didn't explode. It ceased, like it had been unwritten. "Kylus, get me a way out." "Calculating escape trajectories. Now." Outside, Xelari warships that had stayed too long in orbit began vanishing. Not burning, not shattering, just disappearing, like they had never existed in the first place. The wave of annihilation expanded, and Vorac Prime began to break. Veylen lunged for the manual override, yanking out every fail-safe mechanism left. If the station was trying to erase itself, then he had one chance, One shot at stopping whatever was inside from taking everything with it. He slammed his hand onto the final command relay, and the station screamed. The wave halted, frozen, a moment of suspended silence. Then, the sphere pulsed once more, and the station began collapsing in on itself. "Veylen, what did you do?" Wren's voice was barely holding on to control. "I didn't stop it." "Then what the hell did you just do?" Veylen watched as the station turned inward, space folding around it, a distortion swallowing its own structure piece by piece. "I locked the door." The last remnants of Vorrak Prime vanished, and the silence it left behind felt unnatural, like something was still waiting on the other side. Veylen Drask had seen ships burn, men crushed under failing gravity, and entire fleets torn apart by superior firepower. But nothing, not war, not destruction, not even the ghosts of Vorrak Prime, felt as unnatural as the silence that followed. Where the station had once been, now there was only an absence. Not wreckage, not debris, nothing. The wave of annihilation had stopped, frozen mid-collapse, like a blade suspended in the air. He had locked the door, he knew that much. But something about the silence made his stomach coil tight, like the moment before a fault line snaps. "Kylus." His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it. "Tell me it's over." The AI's form flickered in his heads-up display, its glow erratic. That wasn't good. "It should be," Kylus murmured. "And yet the fact that we are still here implies otherwise." Outside, the remnants of Wren's fleet drifted, battered, fractured, but still standing. What remained of the Xelari warships had pulled back, lingering at the edges of sensor range like predators, unwilling to admit they'd been wounded. No one was firing, no one was moving, because no one knew what had just happened. And nobody wanted to be the first to find out. "Drask," Wren's voice came over the comms, low and measured, the tone of someone who had already started calculating his next move. "I need to know exactly what you did back there." Veylen exhaled. "I stopped the collapse. Whatever was coming through, it didn't finish. That sounds like a delay, not a solution. It buys us time. You should be grateful for that much." Wren didn't respond right away. That was never a good sign. A man like Wren only went quiet when he was thinking too hard. And what happens when that time runs out? Veylen stared at the empty space where Vorrak Prime had once been. "I don't know." He didn't like saying that. The Ardent Fang drifted closer to the remaining Terran fleet, its trajectory slow and deliberate. Not a retreat, not a surrender, just a presence. Inside the cockpit, Veylen was already thinking through his next steps. He had locked the door, but the handle had turned. The containment didn't fail completely, but that wasn't a victory. It was a warning. "Kylus, I need a full diagnostic on the energy signature we picked up before the collapse." "Already processing," the AI responded. "But Veylen, this isn't a simple power source. The readings don't conform to anything within known physics. Not Terran, not Xelari, not even classified black site tech. I figured that much. Then here's something worse. The frequency didn't just come from Vorrak Prime." Veylen stilled. "Where else?" "Every major Terran and Xelari deep space relay, all at once." His grip tightened around the console. The station wasn't just a prison. It had been a broadcasting beacon. And now? Every signal in deep space had picked up its final message. Wren's battle carrier loomed ahead, its war-torn hull still pulsing with emergency lighting, half its systems barely functional. And yet, he was still standing, still leading. Veylen hated him. And yet, at this moment, Wren was the only one who might understand what needed to be done. The comms crackled open again. "Drask, we need to talk. Now." Veylen entered Resolute's war room, stepping onto a deck that reeked of desperation and barely contained rage. Officers stood at attention, some with burnt uniforms, some with fresh bandages, all watching him like he was a grenade rolling across the floor. Wren was at the center of it all, arms folded, his expression unreadable. "Drask, Wren, tell me why my deep space sensors just flagged a sector-wide alert." Veylen met his gaze, sharp, unrelenting. Not an ounce of patience left in the man. Because we weren't the only ones listening. The laser plasma display in the room flickered, displaying star maps with radiating pulses. Not military pings, not distress signals, something else. Whatever Vorrak Prime was holding back, whatever it was connected to, just sent a message across half the known galaxy, Veylen said, his voice level. And I don't think we're going to like who answers. Wren's fingers tapped against the table, a slow, deliberate motion. The only sound in the room aside from the distant crackling of damaged power relays. You said you locked it down. I did. Then explain why my long-range sensors just picked up 3 unknown fleets converging toward this sector. The room went still. No one spoke. No one moved. Veylen's pulse remained steady, but his stomach turned cold. Give me their signatures. Kylus's voice cut in. Negative matches on all known factions. These are not Terran. These are not Xelari. Not familiar, not expected. Something new. Something that had been waiting for a signal. Wren's gaze didn't waver. How long until they reach us? A pause. Then Kylus spoke again. 5 hours. Veylen's mind was already moving ahead of his body. 5 hours. That wasn't enough time to run. Kylus, overlay our current fleet disposition against the projected entry points of these unknowns. The laser plasma display pulsed with new data. 3 incoming trajectories, 2 from deep space, 1 from inside Xelari-controlled territory. The Xelari knew, Veylen muttered. That's why they ran, not just from the station, but from whatever they knew was coming. Wren didn't even blink. Then let's make sure we don't run blind. Veylen stood at the center of the war room, the weight of 5 hours pressing down on his skull like a blade waiting to drop. The laser plasma display flickered with incoming trajectories, the 3 unknown fleets closing in from different sectors. Their signatures were unfamiliar, their intent unreadable. Every instinct in his body told him the same thing. This wasn't a coincidence. They had 5 hours. Not enough time to run, not enough time to build a fortress. Just enough time to prepare for the unknown. Kylus worked fast, cross-analyzing the incoming signals against every known military database, searching for any link, a trace of an old war, an abandoned experiment, a lost fleet no one had dared to recover. If these ships were organic, that meant intelligence, an empire lurking beyond charted space. If they were synthetic, that meant something worse, a directive, a pre-coded inevitability, something designed to execute a purpose without deviation. But if they were neither? If these ships belonged to something else entirely, then every strategy they had ever known would be worthless. Veylen shifted his focus to the battlefield around them, what was left of it. Wren's fleet had survived, but barely. Hulls bore the scars of Xelari weapons. Ships that had once been lined in reinforced plating were now skeletons of metal and emergency sealant. Yet they could still fight. They could still hold their ground if it came to that. Tactical refueling was the first move. The derelict Xelari wrecks still held power, some with undamaged energy cores that could be siphoned into their own failing systems. The same ships that had nearly wiped them out might be the only reason they would make it through the next battle. Then came the defenses. Automated turrets still lingered across the battlefield, old Xelari defense grids that had powered down the moment Vorrak Prime collapsed. If they could be realigned, reprogrammed to recognize these incoming fleets as threats, they might have a fighting chance. Might. But war wasn't just about weapons. They had to account for the other possibility, that the ships weren't here to kill them. If the unknown fleets weren't hostile, if they had come in response to Vorrak Prime's call, rather than to claim a battlefield, they needed a plan that didn't end in mutual destruction. That meant communication. Kylus was already configuring emergency protocols, searching for any frequency that might bridge the gap between them. Every known language, every old Terran encryption, even classified code stolen from Xelari diplomatic channels, all of it would be ready to broadcast the moment those ships arrived. If the unknowns didn't fire first, they would be given a chance to speak. If they did, then fallback routes had to be calculated. There was no retreat in open war, Only redirection. The wreckage of Vorrak Prime still carried distortions from its final collapse, creating gravitational pockets strong enough to throw off even experienced pilots. If they could lure their enemies into that space, if they could turn the battlefield itself into a weapon, it might be enough to buy them time. And yet, despite the calculations, despite the planning, one question remained unanswered. What was coming? Were these fleets hunters, arriving to track down the last remnants of whatever Vorrak Prime had once contained? Were they messengers, entities responding to an ancient signal, unaware of the war they were stepping into? Or were they something worse? Because if Vorrak Prime's call wasn't a distress beacon, if it was an invitation, then whatever answered it wasn't coming for diplomacy. Veylen took in the war room, the tired officers, the battered soldiers, the fractured remnants of men who had seen too many battles and survived through the cruel grace of luck and strategy. 5 hours. Wren's eyes never left the display, his expression carved from stone. We don't have time for mistakes, Drask. Veylen's fingers curled into a fist. Then let's make damn sure we don't make any. The countdown to arrival ticked down, and the real war was about to begin. The countdown bled into silence. Every ship, every pilot, every surviving officer sat poised at the edge of an abyss, staring into the void where Vorrak Prime had once been. 5 hours had passed. The fleets had arrived, and now the moment had come. Veylen Drask stood at the heart of Resolute's war room, eyes locked on the laser plasma display that pulsed with the incoming threat. 3 fleets, unknown signatures, forming a silent wall against the black. They weren't broadcasting demands. They weren't warning them off. They were waiting. He exhaled slowly, then turned to Kylus. Status? The AI's digital projection flickered in his heads-up display, strands of blue light warping as it processed the data. They're holding position. No hostile movements. Veylen felt it then, the weight of something bigger than battle, heavier than war. The pause before history breaks in half. They're assessing us, he murmured, like we're a variable they didn't account for. Wren's voice cut through the stillness. Then let's remind them exactly what we are. His expression was unreadable, but the room carried the scent of waiting fire, the kind that smolders before an explosion. Every officer, every soldier, every surviving pilot felt the weight of it. They had survived a war with the Xelari. Now something worse had come knocking. Veylen's gaze flicked to the tactical overlays. The unknown fleets were massive, but there was something off about their formations. No clear battle line, no defensive positioning. They aren't here to fight, he said quietly. Wren's jaw tensed. Then why the hell are they here? Veylen studied the shifting formations, feeling the answer coil in his mind before the words reached his tongue. They weren't looking at the humans. They were searching for Vorrak Prime. The station was never their target, he said. It was their beacon. Wren's lips pressed into a thin line. Then they got here too late. Veylen didn't answer, because too late didn't mean the danger was gone. It meant the equation had changed. The unknown fleet shifted. Then, for the first time, they spoke. The transmission wasn't in words. It was raw, deep, the kind of sound that didn't pass through ears, but through marrow. Then, one by one, the ships began to change. Not moving, reshaping. Metal unwound like living veins of liquid alloy, hulls bending, shifting, morphing. Not technology, not biology. Something in between. Veylen's throat felt tight. Kylus, I see it, the AI responded, voice lower now, uncertain. They're reacting to our presence. A ripple passed through the fleet, an acknowledgement. Then the transmission became words. Your kind was not in the equation. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anything that could be pinned as hostility or diplomacy. It was simply observation. Wren took a slow step forward. His face was like carved steel, unreadable, but Veylen saw it, the shift in his stance, the tension in his shoulders. Wren didn't like being underestimated. We weren't supposed to be here, Veylen said. Wren's eyes burned cold. Then it's a shame for them that we are. The alien ships shifted again, their formations realigning in a pattern that made no sense to human war doctrine. Then came the second transmission. You were not abandoned. You were overlooked. The word sent something sharp down Veylen's spine. This wasn't just some unknown race responding to Vorrak Prime's signal. This was something older, something that had been watching for a long time, and it hadn't considered humanity worth calculating. He exhaled slowly, letting the realization settle into his bones. Then he spoke. Then maybe you should start paying attention. The fleet stilled. The weight in the room changed. Ren glanced at him. You sure about pissing off the gods, Drask? Veylen smiled, sharp and cold. Gods don't make mistakes. He gestured to the wreckage, to the Terran ship still standing, still breathing, despite every impossible odd. And yet here we are. The silence stretched. Then, the fleet shifted again. It was subtle, but it was there. A recalibration. The unknown force was recalculating. Veylen felt something in his chest tighten. Not fear. Something else. Something older. Because if these things had overlooked humanity before, then it meant something else. They weren't ready for them now. Ren turned back to the laser plasma display. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of iron. What's our move? Veylen exhaled, then straightened. He looked at the display one last time. Looked at what was coming. We don't run. We don't bow. He tilted his head slightly, feeling the words settle into the marrow of every man in that room. We remind them exactly why they should have never ignored us in the first place. The display flickered. Outside, the unknown fleet pulsed once more. Veylen Drask watched the last of the unknown fleet slip beyond sensor range, their presence like a storm passing just close enough to graze the horizon. No debris, no bodies. Just a quiet departure, leaving behind more questions than answers. The war room had settled into a tense silence, the kind that came when men who had been ready to die suddenly realized they were still standing. Ren's officers exchanged glances, waiting for orders, for confirmation that what they had witnessed was real. Ren's voice cut through the weight in the room. Set a course. We're not waiting for them to change their minds. A ripple of movement. Officers turned back to their stations, hands flying over consoles, recalibrating systems that had been pushed to their breaking point. The remnants of the Terran fleet shifted into formation, battered, but still holding. Veylen exhaled, rolling the tension from his shoulders. They're not gone. Ren didn't look at him, didn't even blink. Number, but they're done watching. Veylen dragged a gloved hand down his face. The unknowns hadn't left in fear. They hadn't left in defeat. They had left because, for the first time, they had something to think about. Humanity. For years, they had been nothing in the grand order of things. Just another species scrambling for survival, another short-lived blip on the galactic scale. But now they were part of the equation. Kylus flickered into his heads-up display. You understand what this means? Veylen nodded. They'll be preparing for us now. Ren turned to him, the corner of his mouth pulling into something that wasn't quite a smirk but carried the same weight. Then we'd better be worth the trouble. The ship hummed beneath them, the sounds of engines spooling, shields stabilizing, weapons resetting, not for war, not yet. But no one left a battlefield expecting peace. Veylen glanced at the laser plasma display one last time, watching as the residual traces of the unknown fleets faded into the black. He didn't know when they would return. He didn't know what shape they would take when they did. But he knew one thing. This time, humanity wouldn't be overlooked. You're thinking about it all wrong. Dane Kestrel leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, watching the alien across from him with a smirk that barely concealed his irritation. The Xenotheory War Academy lecture hall pulsed with ambient energy, its laser plasma displays flickering with the shifting data streams of planetary predator classifications. The chamber itself was massive, designed to accommodate species from across the galaxy, retractable seating for those with extra appendages, gravity modulation for low-mass beings, even filtration zones for gas-based life forms. Yet, for all the sophistication, the students still thought like children. Across the room, Varesh, a crystalline-bodied Altari, stood with arms folded, if they could be called arms. His fractal exoskeleton refracted light in shifting patterns, a species-specific display of condescension. If humans are so adaptive, Varesh's voice rang like metal striking glass, sharp and grating, then why do your species lack any biological advantage? No claws, no venom, no natural armor. By every evolutionary metric, you shouldn't exist. Murmurs rippled through the assembled students, gravelly clicks from the insectoid Vorac, subharmonic oscillations from the towering Gurzakul, the deep trill of the amphibious Zifferans. Their collective eyes, sensors, and thermal receptors locked onto Dane. He rolled his shoulders, ignoring the way his academy uniform tugged against his collar. They always came back to this question. Always assumed humans were soft, vulnerable, a cosmic mistake that somehow fumbled its way into space. Dane pushed forward, planting his elbows on the desk. He let the silence stretch, let their curiosity fester like an open wound before he spoke. You ever hear of a shark? The laser plasma display shifted, rippling across the curved wall like a living thing. A rendering of Carcharodon carcharius materialized, a great white shark, its obsidian eyes void of hesitation, its body built for nothing but the kill. Rows of serrated teeth gleamed under simulated light, each one designed to tear, not chew. A flick of his fingers and the image changed. Slow-motion footage of a breach. A 2,000-kilogram beast exploding from the ocean, water cascading like shattered glass as it clamped onto its prey mid-air. The seal didn't have time to react. One snap. Gone. The room fell silent. Even Commander Jutha Zin, their war instructor, narrowed their multiple eyes. The edges of their biosuit tightened reflexively. Varesh's crystalline form dimmed slightly. Efficient, he admitted, but still a brute force predator. Dane chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Number, you're looking at it wrong. His fingers moved over the display controls and the projection zoomed into the shark's anatomy. The ampullae of Lorenzini, minute electroreceptors clustered across the shark's snout, flared on the readout. It can detect a heartbeat in the water from over 50 meters away, Dane said. It doesn't just see its prey, it feels it, hides beneath the waves, reading pulses, waiting for a single moment of weakness. It knows you're there before you know it's coming. He turned slightly, gaze piercing through Varesh's refracted hues. You call that brute force? That's what real hunting looks like. The murmurs returned, less dismissive now. The Zephyrans shrank back slightly, their water-rich physiology making them easy prey in theory. The Vorac chittered among themselves, adjusting the lenses of their vision assist nodes. Jutha Zin's voice cut through the tension like a blade. An impressive creature, Cadet Kestrel. But predators exist on every world. What makes yours exceptional? Dane smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile his ancestors might have worn standing on a battlefield, watching an enemy realize they had already lost. Because we studied them. His voice dropped, forcing the others to lean in.